The document arrived on a Tuesday. It came through the deep space relay station orbiting just past Mars, transmitted on a frequency that no human had ever used before. The signal was clean. The message was clear. And when Petra Sloan, Earth's senior diplomatic envoy, read the full translation for the first time, she set it down on the table, folded her hands, and said nothing for a very long time. Lena Voss watched her from across the room. Lena was the one who had done the translation. 31 pages of Varath high script, the kind only used for formal legal proceedings, the kind the Varath used when they were absolutely certain of how something was going to end. It had taken her 4 hours. She had checked it 3 times because she kept hoping she was wrong. She was not wrong. The document was a writ of subjugation. It told humanity, in very precise and polite language, that the Varath Conclave had decided to absorb Earth and all of its colonies into their empire. It listed the terms. It listed the reparations Earth would owe. It listed a date, 48 hours from transmission, by which humanity was expected to formally agree. There was a line near the bottom that Lena kept coming back to. It said in translation, "We do not anticipate resistance, as resistance would be unwise." Petra finally looked up. "Is there any part of this that could mean something else?" "No," Lena said. Petra nodded slowly. She poured 2 glasses of water. She slid one across to Lena without being asked. In the adjoining chamber, the Varath ambassador, Kepler, waited. He was tall, pale, with 4 arms, and eyes that moved independently of each other. He had delivered documents like this one before, 209 times by the Conclave's count. He had never needed a second meeting. Petra walked in alone. She sat down across from him. She looked at him the way a person looks at a locked door they are not particularly worried about. Then she slid the document back across the table. "Humanity declines," she said. Ketheral's secondary eyes, small, dark, positioned just below his primary pair, moved. They were the eyes the Varath used to read emotional states in other species. Fear, desperation, the particular kind of stillness that came before collapse. He had learned to read 46 species with those eyes. He was very good at it. He found nothing in Petra Sloane's face. No fear, no tremor. She looked like a woman sitting in a waiting room, mildly bored, certain her name would be called eventually. He took the document back. He returned to his ship. He sent a priority message to the Conclave before he even cleared the docking bay. It said, "The humans declined. They did not appear frightened. Please advise." The message sat in the Conclave's communication queue for 6 hours before anyone senior enough opened it. By then, the writ had been leaked to the internet. Nobody knew exactly who leaked it. Lena suspected one of the junior communications staff who had seen the original signal come through, but she never said so out loud. It did not matter. Within 3 hours of the leak, the writ had been read by more than 2 billion people. Within 6 hours, that number was closer to 4 billion. The top comment on the most shared version of it, translated from Portuguese, said simply, "Lol, okay." There were memes. There were songs. Someone in South Korea made a short cartoon in which the Varath document was used as kindling for a barbecue. The Earth Diplomatic Corps sent a formal note to the Conclave explaining that the Internet was not an official channel and did not represent government policy. Lena wrote the note. She used very careful language. She deleted the part where she said, "We are aware this is embarrassing, but we genuinely cannot stop them," and replaced it with something more professional. Cole Navarro heard about the writ the same way most people did, through his phone, while standing in his kitchen, watching his coffee maker display an error code it had never shown before. He was 43 years old. He had spent 22 of those years in the Earth Defense Fleet, worked his way up from a junior navigation post on a patrol ship near Jupiter to the command of a strike carrier group. He had retired, 14 months ago. He was supposed to be done. He read the writ on his phone. He read the response on the internet. He watched the meme with the barbecue. He looked at his broken coffee maker. Well, he said, that's a problem. He didn't mean the coffee maker. His phone rang 40 minutes later. It was Admiral Owen Carver, 60 years old, voice like gravel that had been through a lot, calling from Fleet Command in Colorado. The conversation was short. Carver told Cole he was being recalled to active duty, that he would have full command authority over the first contact strike fleet, and that he needed to be in Colorado by Thursday morning. Cole said, "Yes, sir." He packed a bag. He left his coffee maker on the counter. The kettle was still half full of water. He didn't bother emptying it. He walked out the front door and did not look back. 3 days later, the Verath Conclave formally acknowledged humanity's rejection of the writ. Their public statement called it a regrettable display of ignorance. It noted that the conclave had great patience, that they were prepared to offer a brief extension of the deadline, and that they hoped humanity would reconsider before things became unpleasant. Petra Sloan read the statement in her office at the diplomatic station. She read it twice. Then she called Lena and asked her to draft a response. Lena asked what the response should say. Petra thought for a moment. "Tell them we've noted their patience," she said, "and that ours is longer." Lena typed it out. She read it back. It was 4 sentences. Clean, polite, and carrying the particular weight of a sentence that means several things at once. She sent it. In the Conclave's intelligence division, a junior analyst named Velton was assigned to compile a full profile on humanity. It was supposed to be routine work, background data, the kind of thing the Conclave gathered on every species before formal subjugation, mostly to understand what would break fastest. Velton worked through the night. He read human history from the earliest records his database had. Roughly 5,000 years of documented warfare, political collapse, reconstruction, and renewed warfare. He read casualty figures. He read about a species that had spent centuries trying to destroy itself, and had somehow failed to do so. He finished his report at dawn. He sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He filed the report. He marked it urgent. He added a personal note at the bottom, which was unusual for a junior analyst. The note said, "I believe we may have made an error in our initial assessment. I recommend senior review before fleet deployment." The note was read by 3 people. None of them acted on it. The Verath War Council expected panic. They had seen it before. Every species panicked. It was not a weakness exactly. It was simply what living things did when something much larger and much older turned its full attention toward them. The Conclave had records going back 4 centuries. Species panicked, they bargained, they made noise for a little while. Then, when the noise did not help, they went quiet in the particular way that meant they were ready to talk about terms. The Conclave gave humanity 2 weeks before they expected the bargaining to begin. On the 3rd day, humanity started building ships. The footage came through commercial satellites first, then military feeds, then every channel that had a camera pointed at the sky. Earth's orbital manufacturing platforms, the same ones that built cargo haulers and mining rigs, and the long, slow passenger ships that moved between colonies, had gone to full production. Every shift, every bay, every unit of raw material that could be rerouted from civilian use. The Conclave Intelligence Division watched the footage and sent a report up the chain. The report noted that humanity's industrial output was increasing at a rate that did not match threat response models. Threat response models predicted a short surge followed by plateau, as the psychological weight of the conflict suppressed long-term investment. What they were seeing instead was acceleration. The longer the standoff went, the faster humans appeared to be moving. Velton added a note to the file. It said, "This is not panic. I am not certain what this is." No one responded. Cole arrived at Fleet Command in Colorado on a gray Thursday morning and spent the first 6 hours in briefings. He sat at the end of a long table and listened to people tell him things he mostly already knew. The Verath fleet was large. Their weapons technology was advanced. Their military doctrine had won 41 wars across 2 centuries of expansion. Then, Dante Reyes stood up. Dante was 29. He was lean, wore his uniform like it slightly annoyed him, and had the particular look of a person who had been running numbers in his head the entire time everyone else was talking. He had grown up in El Paso. He had done his graduate work in military strategy and then joined the fleet because, as he once told a friend, the math is better when it's real. He pulled up 200 years of Verath military history on the screen behind him. He walked through it the same way a person reads a weather report. Calm, factual. The Verath advanced on a target, overwhelmed their communications, hit infrastructure rather than personnel, and waited. They waited until the population's morale collapsed, until the government asked for terms, until the will to fight simply ran out. The same way fuel runs out, the same way water runs out. Dante tapped the screen. 41 wars, he said. 38 of them ended without major ground engagement. The Verath didn't need to destroy anyone. They just needed to make everyone feel like losing was inevitable. He paused. He looked around the room. They've never fought anyone who didn't mind losing, he said. The room was quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind where people are turning something over in their heads. Cole said, "What does that mean for us?" Dante said, "It means their doctrine is built for a specific kind of opponent, one that can be broken psychologically, one that will calculate the cost of continuing and decide it's too high." He pulled up a new slide. The question isn't whether we can match them ship for ship. We can't. Not yet. The question is whether we can make their doctrine stop working. Cole looked at the screen for a moment. Then he said, "Keep going." 3 decks below the briefing room, Mara Hendricks was in a weapons bay, and she was not listening to any briefings. Mara was 44, built solid, moved like someone who trusted their hands more than their words. She had grown up in South Carolina and had been working on ship weapons systems since she was 22. She had a reputation in the fleet that was either very good or very alarming, depending on who you asked and what they valued. She had a propellant system she had designed on the back of a paper napkin in 2031. It was a modification to the standard railgun array, the kind every Earth warship carried, that would increase muzzle velocity by a factor of 2.5, while reducing power draw by 1/3. When she had submitted it for review 8 years ago, the review board had called it theoretically unsound and structurally inadvisable. She had kept the napkin. Now, with the fleet going to war footing, and the review board suddenly very interested in output over caution, she had been given a full bay, 6 technicians, and permission to make it work. She tested the first modified unit on a Thursday evening. The sound it made was not like a railgun sound. It was something deeper. Something that seemed to move through the floor and up through the feet and into the chest before the ears had even processed it. The technician standing next to her, a 24-year-old from Minnesota named Cal, who had done nothing to deserve what happened next, went slightly deaf in his left ear. "Sorry," Mara said. She did not look sorry. Cal said something that was hard to hear because he could only hear it in one ear now. Mara was already running the output data. Meanwhile, in the Verath fleet, intelligence officers were compiling everything they could find about human military behavior. They pulled communication intercepts, public news feeds, social media posts, anything that moved across a signal they could reach. They built models. They ran projections. The projections kept coming back wrong. The human population was not contracting inward. It was not entering the quiet phase. In the Conclave's experience, when a war began, a population's noise decreased. They stopped talking publicly about resistance. They started whispering about survival. The shift was subtle but consistent across every species the Conclave had ever studied. It meant the psychological turn was happening. Humanity's noise was getting louder. Not frantic, not desperate, something else. Something the Vareth analysts kept circling around without being able to name. There were rallies outside government buildings, but people were laughing. There were long lines outside enlistment offices, but no one looked afraid. There was a video, widely shared, of an elderly man in Georgia sitting on his porch, watching a news report about the Vareth fleet. And he was shaking his head in the slow way of someone who has been mildly inconvenienced. And he said to the camera, "Son, we've been through worse." The analyst assigned to that video filed a note asking for guidance on how to classify it. No guidance came. Back in Colorado, Cole was standing outside the briefing building at the end of a long day, hands in his pockets, looking up at the sky. It was dark enough that a few stars had come out early. Somewhere up there, the Vareth fleet was moving toward them. Dante came and stood next to him. They stood quietly for a while, the way people do when there's too much to say to bother starting. "You think we can do this?" Dante asked. Cole looked at the stars. "Well," he said, "that's a problem." Dante waited. Cole said, "But it's a solvable one." He went back inside. Dante stayed out another minute, looking up. Then he went back in too. In the weapons bay, Mara was still working. She would be there until 2 in the morning. When the last technician left and the bay was quiet, she stood alone in front of the modified array. And she put one hand flat against the housing, the way a person touches something they are proud of, but would never say so out loud. It was going to work. She had always known it was going to work. The fleet had 8 weeks before the first engagement. 8 weeks, it turned out, was enough. The Battle of Kepler's Run was supposed to last 40 minutes. That was the Vareth estimate, based on their models, based on their data, based on 2 centuries of watching other species fight and fold. The human fleet was outnumbered 3-1. Their ships were newer, yes, the 8 weeks had not been wasted. But newer did not mean better, and better did not mean enough. By every calculation the Conclave's tactical division had run, the human fleet would hold a defensive line for a short time, take serious damage, and then pull back. The pullback would be the beginning of the end. Once a fleet retreated, the psychology shifted. The Conclave knew how to read that shift. They had been reading it for a very long time. Far enough in that the Vareth would be committed before they understood what they had sailed into. When the first Vareth ships came through, they found the human fleet waiting in the dark. The first exchange lasted 9 minutes. 3 human ships took heavy damage. One of them, the carrier group's port flank escort, a mid-sized strike vessel with a crew of 400, lost its forward drives completely and began to drift. The Vareth tactical officer, watching the data in real time, marked it as a probable kill and moved on to the next priority. The escort did not stop firing. Without drives, with hull breaches on 2 decks, with fire suppression working in some sections and not others, that ship kept its weapons online and kept putting fire into the corridor. The Vareth tactical officer noticed it again and reclassified it. Not a probable kill, a confirmed problem. On Cole's command ship, Dante's voice came through the channel every few minutes. Even. Like he was reading from a document. Vareth flanking group adjusting. They're trying to push left. A pause. Recommend we tighten the left line. Cole said, "Do it." Losing sensor coverage on the rear quarter. Compensate with the relay drones. Already done. That was how the morning went. Problem and response. Problem and response. No raised voices on the command deck. No shouting. Cole moved between stations with the same energy a man brings to fixing a fence. Steady. Focused. Mildly annoyed that there was so much of it. 3 decks below, Mara's modified railgun arrays were doing exactly what the review board had said they could not do. The increased velocity changed the math on every engagement. Vareth's ships were rated to take a certain amount of railgun fire before their hull shielding required reset. The modified rounds were hitting harder and faster than the ratings expected. 2 Varath destroyers that should have taken a full battery sustained fire to disable went dark after half that. One of Mara's technicians, a young woman named Bree, looked at the output readout and said, "That's not possible." Mara said, "The board said that too." Bree looked at her. Mara shrugged. "I kept the napkin." The Varath Fleet Admiral, Vel Harith, was watching the battle unfold from his command ship, at the rear of the formation. He was a decorated strategist. He had run 17 campaigns. He was not a man who became uncertain easily. He was becoming uncertain. The human fleet was losing more ships than he was. His casualty count was going up slower than theirs. By any conventional measure, the Conclave was winning. And yet the human fleet was not pulling back, not adjusting toward retreat, not showing any of the behavioral markers he had learned to watch for. The hesitation in formation movement, the widening of defensive spacing, the small tactical tells that meant a force had started thinking about survival instead of engagement. The humans were thinking about engagement. Every time he pushed, they pushed back. Every time he opened a gap, something filled it. The escort ship that had lost its drives was still firing 3 hours into the battle. 3 hours. With no ability to move, with a crew that had to know their situation was critical. They had pointed their working weapons at the nearest Varath target and stayed in the fight. Velharath found that particular data point difficult to process. He called his senior intelligence officer to the command deck. "Is there any chance," he said carefully, "that they have reinforcements coming?" The intelligence officer checked. "No, Admiral." "Then why are they still fighting?" The intelligence officer did not have an answer for that. The answer was not in the models. The battle ended not with a retreat, but with a pullback on the Vareth side. Velhareth made the call at hour 11. He had lost 6 warships. 6. He had never lost 6 ships in a single engagement in his entire career. He had gone into Kepler's run expecting a short, clean advance, and had come out with 6 dead ships and a human fleet that was damaged but still present, still organized, still, somehow, intact enough to hold the corridor. He sat at his command chamber for a long time after the order was given. He did the math again. The humans had lost more ships than he had, more personnel, more tonnage. The data was clear. He did it a third time. Then he asked, quietly, for his intelligence officer. The officer came in. Velhareth turned the data screen toward him. "They lost more than we did," he said. "By any measure. So why do the numbers feel wrong?" The officer looked at the screen. He was quiet for a moment. "Because they knew they would," he said. "And they stayed anyway." Velharath looked at him. The officer said, "There's no word for that in our language, sir." I looked. Velharath turned back to the data. He sat with it. He had been in this profession long enough to know when something had changed, even if he could not yet name what. Something had changed. On Cole's ship, in the dark and quiet that came after a long engagement, Cole sat on his bunk. He was not sleeping. He was holding a coin, old, worn smooth, minted long before he was born, and turning it slowly in his fingers. Not thinking about the battle exactly. Not thinking about the losses, not yet, though that weight was there and would be there for a long time. He was thinking about the escort ship. The one that had kept firing without drives. The crew of that ship had known what their situation was. They had made a choice. He turned the coin over. Outside the ship, in the dark of the corridor, the debris was still settling. The stars were quiet. They were always quiet. That was the thing about space that Cole had never quite gotten used to after 20-odd years. All that fire and all that noise, and then it was over, and the stars were just there, Same as always, watching everything with the particular patience of something that has seen all of this before and is in no hurry. He turned the coin over again. The Conclave's High Council met in closed session for the first time in 30 years. The chamber was old. The walls were carved from a stone that existed on only one planet in known space, a deep blue-gray that seemed to hold light inside it rather than reflect it. The council had met in this room during plagues, during internal wars, during the collapse of 3 member civilizations. The room had seen bad news before. Vel-Harath stood at the center of the room and presented his data. He was thorough. He went through every engagement, every exchange, every tactical calculation. He showed the casualty numbers. He showed the ship losses, his and theirs. He showed the formation maps, the communication intercepts, the weapons output readings. He showed the data on the escort ship that had kept firing for 3 hours after losing its drives. He showed 31 engagements. In 31 engagements, the Verath had won every statistical measure. More human ships lost. More human personnel lost. More human tonnage destroyed. By every number that had ever mattered in every war the Conclave had ever fought, humanity was losing. Humanity was not behaving like it was losing. New shipyards had opened, 3 of them, in the past month alone. Enlistment numbers were up. Public communication from Earth was not the kind of communication that came from a species approaching its breaking point. There were no quiet pleas through back channels, no informal requests for terms, no signals at all of the psychological collapse that 31 consecutive tactical defeats should have produced. The High Arbiter listened to all of it without moving. She was the oldest member of the council, old enough that her secondary eyes had gone mostly still. They worked, but slowly, reading only the biggest emotional signals, the way old instruments sometimes narrowed their range. She had led the council for 22 years. She had seen civilizations rise, plateau, and fold. She had a very good sense of when a situation was ordinary and when it was not. This was not ordinary. When Vel-Harath finished, she said, "Bring in the human liaison." Lena Voss had been at the station for 3 weeks, transferred there by Petra Sloane's quiet insistence, after the second engagement at Kepler's run. Lena had not been told exactly why she was there, but she was a person who read rooms well, and the room had told her most of it. She walked into the council chamber and sat down at the seat they had placed for her. She had brought nothing with her. No notes, no materials. She folded her hands on the table the way Petra had taught her, back when she was new and Petra was patient enough to teach. The High Arbiter looked at her for a long moment. Then she asked, "What is your species fighting for?" Lena thought about it. Not long, just a breath. The kind of pause that means the answer is not complicated, just honest, and honest things deserve a second. "It's not really about what we're fighting for," she said. "It's that we've been doing this for 10,000 years. We're not afraid of it." She paused again. "Some part of us is, and I know this sounds strange, pretty good at it." The High Arbiter's secondary eyes moved. Slowly, reading. Lena sat still and let them. "You have been in constant conflict," the High Arbiter said. It was not quite a question. "For most of our recorded history, yes. Internal conflict. Mostly yes, though we've had a few outside problems that helped us focus." She did not smile when she said it. She did not have to. The council went into closed session. Lena was escorted to a waiting room. She sat there for 4 hours. Someone brought her water. She looked out the small window, at the Veroth stars, and thought about the messages she had gotten from Veltan, the junior analyst, who had been quietly sending her observations through a back channel for the past 6 weeks. His notes had gotten shorter and shorter, the way notes do when the person writing them is running out of frameworks for what they are seeing. The last one had been 3 words. We were wrong. She had not replied yet. She was still thinking about how. When the council came out of session, the High Arbiter sent for the Intelligence Division's director and asked for the full analysis, the one that had been building for months, the one that several people had asked for and no one had wanted to present. The director presented it. It was long, thorough, the kind of document that took a lot of work and delivered very bad news very carefully. It moved through human history, human psychology, human military behavior across recorded time. It noted that humanity had spent the majority of its existence in some form of organized conflict with itself, that it had developed entire cultural traditions around combat, sports, games, rituals, that existed purely for the satisfaction of the act itself, with no territorial or survival benefit. That it had made peace with its own internal divisions, not through exhaustion, but through redirection, through finding consistently an external challenge large enough to unify it. The last paragraph sat in the room like something heavy. It said, in careful language, the Varath Conclave, by issuing the writ of subjugation, had provided humanity with exactly the external challenge its psychology required. In effect, the Conclave had not started a war with a reluctant opponent. It had opened a door that humanity had been standing behind for a very long time, waiting. The intelligence director did not read the last line out loud. Everyone in the room could read it themselves. It said, we gave them something to unify against. And they unified. The High Arbiter closed the document. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, send for Petra Sloane. Velharath, standing at the side of the room, asked, what will you tell her? The High Arbiter looked at the closed document on the table. I will tell her, she said slowly, that we would like to discuss a different kind of arrangement. In the waiting room, Lena Voss finally wrote back to Veltan. She kept it short. She did not explain, did not elaborate. She just wrote, yes, but you figured it out, which is more than most people manage. She sent it before she could second-guess herself. Then she stood up, because she could hear footsteps coming down the corridor, and she knew who it was, and she knew what was coming next, and she wanted to be on her feet when it arrived. Petra Sloane came through the door, already pulling off her travel coat, handing it to the aide behind her, and when she saw Lena's face, she stopped. They want to talk, Lena said. Petra looked at her for a moment. How do they look? Lena thought about it. She thought about the High Arbiter's secondary eyes, slow and careful, reading her the whole time. She thought about the closed document on the table. She thought about Velharath, standing at the side of the room with the posture of a man who had spent his career winning, and had just started to understand what he had won. Like people, she said, who just realized the map they've been using is wrong. Petra nodded once. She straightened her jacket. She walked toward the council chamber. Lena watched her go. She sat back down in her chair and let out a breath that had been sitting in her chest for about 3 weeks. Outside the window, the Varath stars were the same as always. Inside, something had shifted. Not ended, not resolved, but shifted, the way a weight shifts when you finally pick it up right. Still heavy, but at least now you are carrying it in a way that makes sense. The Varath offer arrived on a Wednesday. It was, by any reasonable measure, generous. Full withdrawal of all conclave forces from human space. A formal apology, written in the high script, which Lena later told Petra was a significant gesture. The Varath had only issued formal apologies 11 times in 4 centuries of diplomacy, and most of those had been to civilizations they had already absorbed. Reparations, full recognition of Earth's territorial claims, and a seat on the Conclave's Outer Council, with actual voting rights on any matter that touched human space. It was, as Petra said after reading it, everything. She called Cole. He was in a repair dock at the time, watching Mara and her team oversee the replating of the flagship's forward hull. The damage from Kepler's run had been repaired in sections over the past few weeks, but the forward plates had needed new manufacturing, and Mara had insisted on being present when they went on. She was like that about her work. Cole stood near the dock entrance with his phone to his ear, watching workers in magnetic boots move across the hull with the slow, careful steps of people doing something that mattered. Petra read him the terms. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Well," he said, "that's a problem." Petra said, "How is that a problem? It's everything we could have asked for." "It's everything," Cole said, "except the part that covers what they actually did." Petra waited. "They sent a document telling us to surrender," he said. "They moved a fleet into our space. They hit our ships and our people, and now they'd like to say sorry and call it even." He was not angry. His voice was the same even tone it always was. "A good deal isn't the same thing as a fair one." Petra sat with that for a moment. "What do you want to add?" she said. Cole thought about the crew of the escort ship, the one that had kept firing without drives. He thought about them specifically, about 400 people in a crippled ship choosing to stay in a fight they could not physically escape. He thought about what that deserved. "Something with teeth," he said. "Something that makes it clear this doesn't happen again." Petra said, "I'll see what I can build." She had 24 hours before the conclave expected a response. She used all of them. The counter-proposal took 3 days to negotiate. Lena Voss translated every session. She sat between Petra and the Varath delegation, and moved language back and forth across the table. And she did it carefully, because some things lost their weight in translation, and some things gained too much, and the difference mattered. The Varath delegation was led by the High Arbiter herself, which was unusual. In the Conclave's history, the High Arbiter had personally led negotiations exactly 4 times. All 4 had ended in significant treaties. Lena noted this and said nothing about it. The High Arbiter negotiated well. She was precise, patient, and not easily moved. She agreed to things quickly when she had already decided, and went completely still when she had not. Lena learned to read the stillness. It did not mean no. It meant she was running numbers, the same way Dante did, the same way Cole did. Different species, same thing underneath. The reparations were settled on day 1, the withdrawal timeline on day 2, the council seat on the afternoon of day 2, after a longer pause than any of the others. The mutual defense clause was Petra's addition. She brought it in on day 3 near the end of the session, the way you place something on a table when you want the other person to see it clearly and not be surprised. She explained it simply. If any party attacked either Earth or the Conclave, both were obligated to respond. A shared defense commitment, standard in human treaty law, new as far as the Conclave was concerned. The High Arbiter read it. She looked up at Petra. "You want to protect us," she said. It was not quite a question. It was the particular tone of a person who has just heard something they did not expect and needs a moment to put it in the right place. Petra said, "We want to be useful." The High Arbiter looked at her for a long time. Her secondary eyes moved. Slowly, reading. Then she picked up the pen, a Varath formal instrument, long and dark, used only for binding documents, and she signed. The treaty was ratified on a Thursday, the same day of the week as the original writ, a fact that Lena noticed and chose not to mention out loud. Earth's orbital manufacturing platforms shifted back to civilian production schedules over the following 2 weeks. The long work shifts ended. The enlistment lines outside recruitment offices thinned out. Things went quiet, in the particular way things go quiet after a long, sustained effort. Not empty, but resting. Mara Hendricks took 2 weeks of leave, the first she had taken in 4 years. She drove down to Columbia, South Carolina, to her sister's house and spent the time in the garage taking apart a 1968 truck engine her sister had been meaning to fix for a decade. She didn't use a manual. She worked by feel, by sound, by the particular knowledge her hands had built up over 20 years of working on machines that needed to not fail when things were bad. Her sister brought coffee out to the garage on the third morning and watched her for a while, and finally said, "Are you okay?" Mara looked up from the engine. "Yeah," she said. Her sister waited, because there was clearly more. "It worked," Mara said. "The thing the board said wouldn't work. It worked." She looked back at the engine. "I knew it would. I just couldn't know I was right until it actually happened." Her sister said she understood. Mara went back to work. Dante Reyes wrote an academic paper about the Kepler's run engagements. It was thorough, well-sourced, and carefully argued. He submitted it to 4 journals. All 4 held it for over a year before publishing. Not because it was wrong, but because no one could agree on what subject area it belonged to. It was not quite military history, not quite psychology, not quite something that fit in any of the existing boxes. He was used to that. Lena Voss got a message from Kepler, the first ambassador, the one who had waited in the adjoining chamber on that first Tuesday with the quiet certainty of a man who had delivered 209 documents and never needed a second meeting. The message was short, written in high script. She translated it herself, slowly, making sure she had it right. It said, "I have spent a long time looking for the right word for what your species is. I consulted the full conclave archive. I contacted linguists on 4 member worlds. We do not have the word. I am not certain the concept exists in our language." She wrote back. She kept it simple. She wrote, "Yeah, we know." She sent it before she could think of something more diplomatic to say. Then she thought about it and decided it was already the right thing. Cole Navarro was on the observation deck of the station when the Verath fleet left. It was a slow departure. 47 ships moving out of human space in good order, with the deliberate pace of something that is leaving because it has chosen to, not because it is running. There was a kind of dignity in it. Cole watched it and felt no satisfaction in the departure, only the strange flat calm of a thing finished. He was holding the coin. He turned it over in his fingers. Once, twice. The metal was warm from his hand. Dante came and stood beside him. He looked at the ships going. He looked at Cole. He did not ask about the coin. He had stopped asking about the coin about 2 years into knowing Cole. "So what happens now?" he said. Cole watched the last of the Verath ships clear the range of the station's lights and go back into the dark. "Now," he said, "we see what they do with the door we left open." Dante thought about that. "Mutual defense clause," he said. "Yeah. You think they'll actually call on it?" Cole turned the coin over one more time. Then he put it in his pocket. "Eventually," he said, "something out there is going to push them. And when it does, they're going to remember that the most stubborn thing they ever met is on their side now." He looked out at the space where the fleet had been. "That's worth something." They stood there a little longer. The stars were out. They were always out. They did not care about the Verath or humanity or the terms of any treaty. They had been burning for longer than either species had been standing upright, and they would be burning long after both were gone. And there was something in that. Not comfortable exactly, but solid. The kind of solid that comes from accepting the size of the thing you're standing next to. Cole went inside first. Dante stayed another minute. Then he went inside too. The station's observation deck was empty. The stars continued. In an archive on the Verath homeworld, a junior analyst named Velton was quietly building a new file. He had been building it for weeks. It was a study, thorough, careful, still incomplete, on humanity. Not a threat assessment, not a tactical profile. Something harder to categorize. He was trying to understand what made a species keep firing when it had every reason to stop. He had not found the answer yet. He kept the file open,